Okay, hello everybody. I am thrilled to have here Mary Kay Greer, my mentor and idol, who has helped so many hundreds and thousands of people to learn to read tarot, including me. So today I can think of no one better in this inaugural episode to ask the question, why read tarot?
Because it's fun. It's fun to read tarot.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and why is it that it's so much fun? I mean, there's something I think each of us has in their backstory, like a moment where you were like drawn to the cards because there was something inscrutable and weird and wonderful and mysterious and not like anything else about them. But why? Why do you think that is?
Oh, well, I think we're drawn to images and telling stories. They really stimulate those stories. And for me, my first experience of it was I'd been into archetypal criticism in college classes. And so here were the archetypes, those I could immediately see mythic stories being played out in the cards. But because people would shuffle them and draw them, they were telling me what mythic story they were going through at that time. So that was my first thing is it's story. And
It's
it's a
story.
story about people, about the individual and where they are at that moment. And it puts it in parallel with those great mythic stories, which are all the conflicts and questions and issues that all of us deal with over centuries, if not
Yeah,
millennia.
I think that's really true and very wise. I mean, I think that, for most of us, I think an ordinary day looks kind of boring on the outside, right? We're going shopping in the
Yeah.
grocery aisles, or we're getting in our car, or we're making coffee for ourselves, and our little problems seem like they don't matter in the scope of things, but tarot to me seems to say it does matter. You matter. You're the center of this story and your story is worth telling. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, so perfectly
Yeah.
said. Yeah.
And
And those
yeah.
simple things, I just want to say, like a car becomes a whole metaphor for what journey are you on now? Going to the grocery store, what's feeding you? So you
Yes.
get into this transportation to go for what's feeding you. And you start looking at your life that way, and it becomes a much more interesting life, I think.
It certainly is a much more interesting life for sure. For sure. The other thing, oh, and we should just address this right at the beginning. I say tarot, you say tarot. Both are normal. Both ways
Yeah.
seem to be universal. So we don't even worry about it. I also wanted to sort of bring up the idea that like what makes tarot weird, another thing that makes tarot weird and different is the fact that we shuffle. We shuffle when we
Mm.
invite chance in. And where else do we do that in our lives?
Oh,
I
that's,
can't think.
I'd have to think about that.
I don't
Yeah.
even know, most of the time I feel like we need to be in control, for so much
Um,
of what we do.
it is core to divination, which is something far bigger than just, our tarot. It's
Yeah.
when you think back to very primitive people, divination was a way of figuring out what the gods wanted, and you needed a randomizing. They didn't think of it that way, but something that would allow spirit to come through. So there's something about what we call, random chance, which didn't exist for them.
Mm.
But doing those same processes opened a door somehow to spirit.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
just what
think
came to
that
mind.
that's so interesting that something that's truly random that comes out of pure chaos can not just sometimes or often or once in a while have meaning for us, but always, like literally every
Yeah,
time. And to me, it blew my mind the first time I held a tarot deck. It blows my mind today that that can be true.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the magic of things. I mean, if you stop to listen to the leaves rustling in a tree, that's a moment of randomization. And yet, if you're in the right mood and you're sitting there, somehow something comes through, even if it's just a feeling of serenity, or it may be a message that they seem to be sending to you.
Yes. I wonder sometimes if tarot kind of, or the practice of divination generally, but for our purposes, tarot, if it changes the quality of our attention, the attention we play in the
Mm.
world. I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's how I live. It's hard to think. It's hard to think outside of that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's why I mentioned trees and leaves is that I think tarot can lead you very much to as many other tools can also do to that if you choose to focus your energy at any particular time and let nature, the cards, tea leaves speak to you, then you're speaking to something that's beyond just your normal, ordinary self
Hmm.
that comes with a ring of some kind of personal truth.
Yeah, I agree. I think that something about shuffling the cards has always seemed to me like a metaphor for the world we walk in, the idea that when we go out there in the world, there are a lot of things that we can't control at all, and shuffling is an
Yeah.
expression of that in a way. But by choosing a card, it's almost like we're choosing our fate. We're expressing that we are okay with whatever comes, right? And that we're going to make
Mm.
peace with it in some way. And I think for that reason that drawing a card, just the act of drawing a card seems incredibly brave, just in terms of being a human being, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and there is kind of an irony there because a lot of people turn to tarot for control.
Mm,
Is he going to ask me for a second date? I
right.
want to be able to control the situation. What does he think about me?
Oh
You
my
know,
God, that
um,
question.
I know it's a perpetual one, especially comes up online, in different
For
groups when
sure. I
people
think
can
I'm going to
ask
do an
anything.
episode. What do they think of me?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then you do it often enough. And my favorite saying for the purpose of tarot is tarot helps you meet whatever comes in the best possible way.
I
And by
literally
best, I
have that
mean
written down from
open.
your blog right here on my piece of paper.
Oh,
It helps you meet whatever comes in the best possible way. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's different than thinking that you can control. Is he going to ask me to marry him, or
Hmm.
is she going to, whichever. Anyway, those kind of as the longer you use the tarot, I think those kinds of questions fall more by the side, except occasionally.
Except occasionally, exactly. Yes,
Every
yes.
once in a while, you kind of go, "Oh, is this going to happen?" Or what's the best I can do, as if it was going to answer in some way with a specific thing, rather than
Yes.
helping you to be fully present in the moment for whatever.
Helping you to be fully present in the moment. So, some people will use tarot for prediction. Some people will use tarot for insight. I guess, in your own words, how would you sort of recommend that someone who's new to tarot think of the way they should use tarot, or what might help them approach the cards?
People always ask about how do you get started with tarot, and this is similar in that I think there's a million ways to approach it.
Hmm.
And whatever you do is what you do. So somebody might approach it from, I want to have concrete answers. Another one might be, what is it reflecting of me? Or what is the great, there must be a story behind these
Yes.
that
Yeah.
I can, key into, or it can tell me a story about myself, a mirror. There's so many different ways, and I don't ever want to put down any one of them no matter how silly or stupid it seems
So there's
to
no
an
wrong
experienced
way to
reader.
read tarot, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or no
Yeah.
wrong way to approach it.
Hmm.
And I don't want to ever put a wrongness around it because we all stumble through our
Yeah.
experiences. I just hope
Yeah.
that people come to a point where tarot becomes a very creative and self affirming mechanism for you
Yes.
to to find solace in some moments, to find excitement because you see something totally new. It should generate some kind of, I hope, good feelings.
Yeah, and if it's not, maybe then's a time to rethink the way you're using it. If it's making you feel
Yeah.
more anxious or more scared or more sad, maybe it's time to ask different questions or to consider the way you're receiving the answers a little bit differently.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
remember a teacher, and I went to her for a tarot reading, and I had to laugh later because I also saw her doing it sometimes with other people. Is that the devil would turn up and she'd go, "Oh, how wonderful! You just got the devil!" And the person's kind of sitting there with their jaw hanging open, going, "What do you mean wonderful? It looks scary to me."
Yes.
And she's
Yes.
just over fusing, and it sometimes got to be a little ridiculous, but at the
Hmm.
same time, it took away all the anxiety that people had about these cards. And I think I still carry an element of that in me, that I can look at any card and think, oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, what does that mean if I say how wonderful?
Yes. 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 To look at why you're having the reaction that you're having. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've read for so many people and gotten, as you have, and gotten so many kinds of questions. Everything from, what would my mother who passed on like to say to me, to, I lost my keys. Where are they? To what is my life purpose? I once had somebody say, "Will I get a 90 on the test?" And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
I always remember that Rachel Pollack, our dear friend, once said to me, "Who am I to question the question?" So
She was great at that.
yeah.
Absolutely fabulous.
And so,
Yeah.
sometimes I'll kind of be like, "Oh God, I don't know if I can answer this," and I'll just say, "Oh God, I don't know if I can answer this, but I'll try." We'll just see what the cards say, and and you
Yeah.
don't give up your agency or your common sense or anything else when you read tarot. It's just an addition to
I,
to what you come with already.
I do tend to reframe questions. So, one of the things that Rachel and I enjoyed doing was sometimes presenting these two opposite points of view,
Yeah, yeah.
and that both of them can exist, and we can learn from each other
Hmm.
about who am I to question the question. And yet, for me, it's been very helpful at moments to question that. One woman
Hmm.
came in one time and wanted to know, was her daughter going to get out of jail at her next review? Was her husband going to get a job after being out of work for 3 years?
Oh my
And
God.
something else. And I looked at her and I said, I can't do third party readings for someone
Hmm.
else who isn't here and hasn't given permission. What I'd like to look at is, how is this affecting you?
Hmm.
And she started crying and she said, nobody has ever asked me that
Oh,
before.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
She may not have
sometimes,
even thought to consider herself in this whole equation. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, there's no right or wrong answers, but I do think it's worth looking at both and.
Hmm.
Both Rachel's perspective and my perspective. And in the
Yeah.
moment, that's one of the things where our own intuition comes in as a reader.
Yeah.
What do we do
Yeah.
in this moment with this person?
Yeah, and I think that in some ways I'm like you as well. I mean, there have been times when people have asked me, "When am I going to die?" And I will just say, "Well, let's 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 see what we can do about addressing your fears of dying." Let's start there, right? you know, um,
Mm-hmm.
because that's a question I know that I can help with. I don't know if
Yeah.
I can actually provide something I would call help with the question, when am I going to die? You know?
Yeah.
For those people who are new to tarot or who are just starting out, what's the advice you give for how to frame your question? Is there a best way to frame your question?
I've got my favorite way to frame the question. And to me, this, if I could turn every question into this format, I would be absolutely delighted. So, my general all purpose question is, what do I most need to look at in my life right now? To which you can also append, what do I most need to look at in my life right now around my relationship with my boss at work,
Around
around
X.
whatever. What I call an
Exactly.
issue-oriented reading.
Very good. So, what do I most need to look at right now, or what do I most need to look at around this issue right now?
Exactly.
Something like that.
Yeah.
That's pretty much exactly what I do. That's my default as well. I say, what do I need to know about? Because apparently I'm obsessed with knowing things. But
Yeah.
either can work.
Looking at or knowing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. It's funny. This is a little bit of a digression, but I was thinking about how when you said that, how the suit of swords seems to also have this obsession with either looking or knowing, right? How the all of the people seem to have either a blindfold, or they're looking the other way, or they're lying face down on the ground, or
Looking
so.
or now. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's the only one that you could
Uh-huh.
say their eyes are really open and looking at something clearly is maybe the Five of Swords, the guy with
Uh-huh.
he seems to be
The
looking
one
at
in
something,
front.
but yeah. Anyway, it's neither here nor there, but I've always thought that's interesting about the Suit of Swords.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to ask you next is, we live in, I guess, what you would call theoretically, technically, a rational society, though it doesn't behave that way. And a lot of the time, most of us are fully on board with the idea of causality, rationality, linear thinking, logic. You know where I'm going here. So, what does a methodology like tarot have to offer, say, my friend who is a nuclear physics professor and lives, his life in a very X leads to Y leads to Z manner?
I think one of them is options and potentials and possibilities. And if we go back to the divination done, in ancient tribal societies, where they normally go to a particular place to hunt, if they use a divination system and the divination system goes somewhere else, they begin to branch out, to go and try out new directions. And if it works, they go back to that divination technique. Otherwise, they get rid of that one and find another.
Right.
But it does allow us to reach out beyond our habitual, normal ways of thinking and acting. And so I think
Yes.
that's one thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a certain hubris to thinking that we can have everything up here in our heads and that there's nothing beyond that. I mean,
Yeah.
even, there's, as you know, our Jungian friends love to talk about the various scientists who had dreams, which, led to the discovery of the structure of the atom or the structure of the DNA helix, or,
Oh,
yeah. And to say that everything can be explained by science, to me, is a bit of a cop out, and uh, an unwillingness to engage with the fact that we really don't know everything, and in fact, what we don't know is far greater than what we do know.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think that I don't know. I think that knowledge is one thing and meaning is another. And, I think that we live in an age with a lot of knowledge and maybe not as much meaning a lot of the time.
I
I
hadn't
mean,
really thought of
I don't
this
know.
too. Yeah.
I mean, I think that
Yeah.
one of the things that people come to me asking about all the time. It's like, where do I find meaning in my life? Right.
Hmm.
And, my answer is like, tarot, it's a meaning making machine.
That's where you find meaning. Yeah, yeah. I agree, and it adds dimensionality. And there's also, to me, in when you're looking for meaning, when you're finding meaning in things, there's a magical element. And to me, tarot and magic often go very closely together. Let me give you one example that's not specifically tarot, but because of tarot, I look at a lot of things metaphorically in life. So I had a class where people would tell a story of something that happened to them that was somewhat disturbing, and they never could figure out what was going on or what it meant. And we would all look at it in terms of the symbology and the metaphor, just like I had learned from tarot decks. Sometimes we'd pull cards, but other times we would just look at, like I said, car as transportation device. So where are you going? So we would, come up with this whole scenario, and usually end with that every part of that experience they had had was a part of themselves. So that would be
Yeah.
kind of our end point. And then the following week, because I would do it in 12-week classes with like 10 people, so that each person had a whole class to tell their story. And we would then do check-ins. And every single person somewhere along the line giving their check-in would say, that's not an issue anymore. That's all been resolved. This relative that I didn't speak to for so many years called me up. This dog that was barking all the time and wouldn't let me sleep, I haven't heard him in, the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's something about finding meaning in your experience and having it brought home to where is that in you that somehow has an outer effect.
That is
I don't know how.
absolutely true. We can't explain it. We don't want to explain it, but it's simply true. It's
Yeah.
there's something uncanny about it, and it. All you can say is that it's reliably going to happen.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, yeah,
something changes in us, and something in the outer world often changes to accord with that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure that one way to think about it would be Jung's theory of synchronicity, which we should talk about at some point, but perhaps not today. but um,
Yeah,
but I hope if people get anything from this conversation, they recognize that it's okay to believe in magic, because magic's going to happen whether you believe in it or not, just like science.
yeah, magic and science, they're not that different. One
They're not that
definition of
different.
magic is, I don't remember the exact words, but it's whatever science doesn't yet see or doesn't have a name for yet.
Yes, yes, indeed. Um, so my kind of final question, I phrased it like this: how can tarot help with the modern epidemic of anxiety? Which is kind of a big, broad question. I mean, I think we're all really super anxious, especially right now. Um, and personally, I think that tarot has a lot to offer an anxious person in an anxious time. But let me ask you, if one of our listeners is anxious about everything that's happening around us for many very good reasons, how would you
Yeah.
suggest that they use the tarot to help them?
Well, like we said, it's a randomizing device. And so in normal times, like when I grew up in, the 50s and 60s, there were certain patterns that you could kind of rely on and would repeat, and you thought would happen forever. And so you begin to rely on those expectations. And, throughout history, there have been periods where people could really rely, for generations even, on certain patterns of this is how you handle it. So in times of great anxiety, those patterns don't hold anymore. Everything gets
Yeah.
thrown up in the air. And what's better to deal with something that's totally thrown up in the air, and none of
Yeah.
our normal ways of predicting anything functions anymore. So why not tarot? It's just like that randomizing device for where the animals are going to be when you're going out hunting. You
Yeah.
know, we reach beyond the old tried and true way of doing things when it's no longer working. And I think tarot is a wonderful, wonderful way of not only coming up with new options and possibilities, but having the ones that resonate with kind of deep meaning within us, which I think is the deeper level of a reading, is something that you can, even through difficult times, you can say, I learned from this. I got a better perspective from this. I was able to see things in a new way that gave me, hopefully, hope. Yeah.
Right, right. You're right, exactly. Because I think, in anxious times or when you're in an anxious situation, the difficulty is just like there's so much uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty. And if you engage with a practice like tarot, you know that there's going to be an answer. There is a card for that, right? There is an
Yeah.
answer of some kind. How you receive that answer, how you interpret it may be somewhat negotiable, but it's not like there isn't going to be an answer, which I think is
Yeah.
incredibly reassuring.
Yeah, you've got something to sit with and contemplate. And often, again, that magic thing, you get a sense of the cards coming together and having a little mini epiphany about it. And things seem to fall in place with it. That's the
Things
magic
seem to
part
fall in
that I
place.
can't
Yeah.
ever explain. Yeah.
Right, right. And it may not be that, like, you may not achieve great wealth or you may not achieve great fame or whatever it is you thought you wanted, but there is a certain peace and coming to terms with fate, I think, which comes
Yeah.
from handling the cards and engaging with them regularly. Yeah.
A deepening. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me it does. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Greer. It has been wonderful to have you on the show, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Wonderful. Until next time.